we're coming on the air without any rockets up in the air because NASA's scrubbing today's launch of the Artemis rocket before it could take off for its trip around the moon. It's the first step toward another lunar landing for Americans. We will tell you about the engine issue that set the mission back. Plus, the DOJ says it's done looking into all of those documents the FBI took from Mar-a-Lago, just as former President Trump may be closer to getting a so-called special master. What comes next there? Plus, new details on when we might hear from Georgia Governor Brian Kemp in a separate Trump investigation. And a Mississippi mayor is warning locals to get out now as record rainfall causes rivers to swell. Over in Kentucky, floods are pushing back the start of school. We are live in Jackson in eastern Kentucky. Plus, kids are back to school in Philadelphia, still wearing masks, why parents there say it's better to keep schools closed because of COVID. And Serena Williams wants one more major win before she hangs up her racket for good. We're live at the U.S. Open as the 23-time Grand Slam champ makes her final run later in the show. Hey, I'm Ellison in for Hallie. We're getting new reaction from NASA in the last couple of hours on today's scratched launch of the Artemis rocket. Right now, it seems like the launch could get pushed back several days. The unmanned spacecraft was going to take off this morning and kick off a 42-day trip around the moon. Its mission to get things prepared for humans to take that flight and for American astronauts to finally return to the surface of the moon. So what's the problem here? Turns out there is a fairly significant issue. They're apparently having a problem getting the engine cold enough for takeoff. NASA says they will not try this launch again before Friday. If Friday doesn't work out, they say Monday is also an option. But there's the potential here that it might even happen later than that. An engine issue is no joke, and NASA Administrator Bill Nelson says Artemis will not fly until they're confident it's ready.
Needless to say, the complexity is daunting when you bring it all into the focus of a countdown.
Tom Costello is at the Kennedy Space Center. Tom, Artemis has previously had an issue similar to the one today, right? So what exactly is going on here? How big of a deal is this?
Well, it's a big enough deal they scrubbed. I mean, and so let me just break it all down for you. This is a model of the Artemis rocket here, and the problem is way down here at the bottom. They've got 4 engines down here at the bottom, right there. Can you see them? Right, and they're all borrowed from the space shuttle era. All 4 of these rocket engines have been on space shuttles. That's fine, just like you reuse an engine on a 737, right? Well, one of them, engine number 3, is not getting cold enough. It needs to be super cold because it is bringing in this hydrogen, liquefied hydrogen, if you will. That makes it super cold. It has to be super cold to then accelerate up to 17,000 miles per hour. I mean, this is a monster of a rocket. It'll be just unbelievably fast and the loudest ever here at the Kennedy Space Center. But because they've got that issue, they had to scrub it. So they now have to figure out, is this a fix that they can make right there on the launch pad, or do they have to bring this entire stack back to the building behind me? That's the Vehicle Assembly Building, the VAB. It's been there since the Apollo days, right? That's where they stack all these rockets together, and that's where they would have to swap out an engine if that's required. However, right now, it doesn't look like that's going to be the immediate pursuit. They're going to continue to diagnose this problem tomorrow and then through the next couple of days.
All right, so I know obviously we need that diagnosis because the little fix there versus moving it is a big difference. But based on what you know right now from speaking with people there, do you think that a launch on Friday is really possible, or is it going to be further down the way?
So I came away this morning thinking they're going to have to delay beyond Friday. And then the news conference, we heard from the chief mission manager for this, and as only an engineer can, he explained what the chances are for Friday. Take a listen.
There's a non-zero chance we'll have a launch opportunity on Friday. We're going to play all 9 innings here, you know, and we're not ready to give up yet.
There is a non-zero chance of having a liftoff on Friday. That means there's a chance, but we don't know how big of a chance. So they got to work through all of this, and if they can, they will try for Friday. However, we've got weather as a variable here. I mean, right now the chances that weather could interfere on Friday are pretty substantial. We're looking at a 12:15 p.m. launch time. If that doesn't go, we'll try for Monday, Labor Day, and then the weather gets worse. So, you know, Florida in the summer, the weather can be pretty volatile. But right now they're hoping that they can, in fact, go on Friday. Right now, there aren't any engineers out on the pad. They were exhausted, working through the night, as you could expect. And so NASA sent them all home, said, get some sleep. We'll try again tomorrow morning and diagnose the problem.
What is the biggest thing that you're watching over the next couple of days here to see whether or not this is going to take place? What's top of your list to watch?
Well, they make the point the engine itself is not failing. It's just not getting cold enough. So they just got to figure out, well, do they have some sort of a flow problem with the fuel, that super cooled fuel? And if they can diagnose that and figure it out, then maybe they'll be able to launch. They don't think right now that it's a malfunctioning engine. So you can see the distinction they're making there, right? If it's a fuel valve issue, then hopefully they can fix this pretty quickly. If they go on Friday, if they try on Friday, then we're all going to be standing here and hoping that we don't have lightning and rain and everything else. There are very, very tight and strict weather parameters that NASA subscribes to. Weather can't be at all close to the Cape, not just lightning, but rain. So they're going to be watching that very closely as well on Friday and then on Monday. I may be taking up Florida residency and getting a driver's license is the bottom line.
I think everyone here would support that because it would mean more time of us having your expert analysis. Quickly, while we have you here, would you just remind us why this launch is so significant?
Well, this is a test mission, as you suggested. I mean, there are no humans on board. There are going to be 3 mannequins on board, high-definition, high-tech mannequins that will essentially measure the forces that a human would experience in that rocket, in the Orion spacecraft, as they go to the moon and come back. They got to test out all of these systems before they will put humans on board. That would be the next flight, maybe in 18 months, and then landing on the moon 2 to 3 years away. So a test flight to check it all out, critically important.
All right, Tom Costello, thank you so much. Let's turn to the latest on former President Trump. The Justice Department now says it's done with an initial review of all the documents seized from his Florida home by the FBI. In a filing today, the DOJ says it has identified some documents that may fall under attorney-client privilege, and they say they're putting those to the side. Why? In part because a Trump-appointed federal judge looks like she'll side with the former president to get a so-called special master in this case. Basically, that's an independent third party to look through these documents. As a reminder, the FBI took 11 sets of classified documents. That's on top of another 184 classified documents Mr. Trump voluntarily turned over back in January. And the intelligence community is looking into those documents. The director of the National Intelligence, Avril Haines, is telling lawmakers that she's looking into whether U.S. security has been compromised here. Those are not the only updates that we've got on the investigations into Mr. Trump. Down in Georgia, Governor Brian Kemp lost his bid to squash his subpoena in Fulton County's election interference case, but won his push to delay it until after the November election. We're going to talk about that with Blaine Alexander in just a second. But first, we will start with Ryan Riley. Ryan, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Tell us, is the DOJ basically trying to get ahead of this and say, hey, we don't need a special master because we already did the work? What's going on here?
I don't think it was so much getting ahead of them because essentially the Trump team waited 2 weeks until after the search actually took place to actually file anything. And even when they filed something, it was sort of just legal gobbledygook, and they had to be instructed on how to actually file something that pertained to the law, at which point the judge just said, OK, now that you've cited some actual precedent and some actual mandates that I have to pursue this, I will give an inclination to appoint a special master. But essentially, you know, DOJ had 2 weeks, 3 weeks to run this already and basically set aside anything that would be covered by attorney-client privilege, which was a very small subset of this larger group of documents that were seized from Mar-a-Lago now 3 weeks ago.
So let's say they do get a special master assigned here. What happens next?
Essentially, they would do the work that the FBI and DOJ have already done here. They would essentially go through those documents and decide which of them were protected by attorney-client privilege, which should be a very small subset of it. I think what you can expect from the Trump team is essentially they're going to try to use this as a way to wedge into the investigation and expand it. They're going to have to try to basically expand what documents could be protected. They're going to try to bring this beyond just attorney-client privilege documents and say that there's some documents that were covered, say, by executive privilege that should be also protected. But the key here is that executive privilege at this point in time, when President Joe Biden is in office isn't really up to the former president to decide what documents that applies to. But I think certainly that's the argument that they're going to advance forward, that some of this should have been kept secret because it pertains to the executive privilege of the former president at this point. Ellison.
Okay, and in terms of the intel community looking into potential security threats, what are the big questions they're going to need to answer?
I think the big questions are essentially whether this had an impact on any sources overseas who could potentially be jeopardized by this. And a big part of that is obviously figuring out who exactly had access to the documents at Mar-a-Lago during this time, these more than a year of time in which they weren't supposed to be kept there. There are, of course, a ton of documents that were not supposed to be kept at Mar-a-Lago, even regardless of their classification level, because they were just presidential documents that properly belonged in the National Archives and are the property of the American people rather than the private citizen Trump at this point. But it's key whether or not Trump was showing off those documents to perhaps any visitors that were coming to the facility. That's really what I think they're going to ultimately try to get to the heart of here, Ellison.
Okay. All right, Ryan Riley, thank you so much for that. Let's turn now to Blaine Alexander and talk about the Georgia investigation, because it has been a busy day. Blaine, I mean, it seems like the judge is giving both sides a win here in some way, saying, okay, Kemp has to testify, but not right now. Walk us through how that ruling was made and whether or not this is something that was expected.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, Ellison, is that both sides kind of get a win here. Overall, the Kemp team was trying to quash the subpoena altogether. They were saying that the governor shouldn't have to testify at any point. The judge says, I don't necessarily agree with that, but what I will do is delay this testimony until after early November. Why is that important? Because we've got a very closely watched election that Governor Kemp is preparing for a rematch against Stacey Abrams. And his team essentially said that they don't want everything that's happening over here with this investigation to kind of seep into the politics leading up to Election Day. So they were saying, listen, if you don't quash the subpoena altogether, at least let us delay until after the election to be able to testify. That way the two won't get muddled. The judge says, OK, that's fine. But as soon as the election's over, you have to come back and you have to promptly schedule time to testify. So that's the timing aspect of all of it. Now, the other piece is, of course, why do they want to hear from Governor Kemp in the first place? Remember, this investigation is looking into any alleged interference that the former president had in the election here in Georgia. And you'll remember that in those days after the 2020 election, he, in a very public way, put a lot of pressure on the governor to call a special legislative session to overturn Biden's victory here in Georgia. Governor Kemp did not do so, but undoubtedly the DA is going to want to talk with him about that. Now, the other piece that we're watching in all of this, Ellison, is the fact that the DA has kind of given some inclination into when this could wrap up. She doesn't talk about this a whole heck of a lot, but she happened to have a news conference on a different topic today. As you can expect, she was asked about this, and here's what she had to say. Take a look.
I think we're about 60% through of all of the people that we need to be brought up. We will continue to fight to make sure that the grand jury and the public gets the truth. And I am very hopeful that by the end of this year, I'll be able to send the grand jury on their way.
And that's notable. She says she wants to have this wrapped up by the end of December, Ellison.
All right, Blaine Alexander, thank you so much for that. We appreciate it. We're learning more about the two people who were killed in Oregon last night when a man opened fire on a grocery store in the city of Bend. One of the victims, 66-year-old Donald Surter Jr., was an employee at the store. He tried to disarm the gunman. Police say he likely prevented many more deaths. Glenn Bennett, another victim, was shot near the store entrance. He was 84 years old. It was a violent weekend in other cities across the country, too. In Houston, a man who got evicted from his apartment set fire to the building to lure other tenants outside and then shot them. 3 people died there. And in Philly, a 4-year-old boy getting his back-to-school haircut was shot in the shoulder inside a barber shop where he was getting that haircut. Tomorrow, President Biden is set to address gun violence in the U.S. and talk about his Safer America plan. Steve Patterson is following those new developments out of Oregon. Steve, walk us through what happened out there. We also learned a little bit more about the shooter tonight. Is that right?
Yeah, a lot more about this suspected shooter in this case, Ellison. We had a news conference probably about an hour and a half ago now, detailing a lot more about what happened. I'll say his name once and only once. The suspected shooter is 20-year-old Ethan Miller. Police say that suspected shooter came from a residential area behind this massive shopping center in Bend, right? So he's weaving through parking lots. He gets to the front of that grocery store, and witnesses report just a torrent of gunfire, sheets of gunfire, often what sounded like in the dozens, even before he got to the entrance of that grocery store. And of course, when he gets to the entrance, he shoots that 84-year-old victim right there in the entrance, makes entry into the store. Victims report hearing even more gunfire, that he's basically trying to do as much damage as humanly possible. Takes aim at that 66-year-old who heroically tries to disarm him. And then he is found moments later by police, who do not fire a shot in this instance, with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Police say after this, they serve several search warrants, including one on his vehicle and one in his apartment. In his apartment, they find even more materials, several Molotov cocktails, as well as a sawed-off shotgun. In his apartment, they find more ammo and digital devices that he may have been using part of the attack as well. He was carrying an AR-15. Police recovered that alongside another weapon inside the store as well. Allison.
And Steve, police say that they are still trying to work through a motive here. At this point, where does their investigation go?
Yeah, that's the main question, right, Allison? What is the motive of this attack? I think a lot of it centers, of course, on those areas that I just mentioned, where those search warrants were served, of course, in his apartment. That includes interviewing people that may have knew him, neighbors, people he may have worked with, people he went to class with. But I think a large part of this will include his digital footprint. There were some reports that he was leaving sort of a running manifesto online about the weaponry he was amassing, some of the suicidal tendencies that he was thinking about, and even plans that may have outlined the attack here today, including one that may have outlined an attack at the high school that he had just attended not too long ago as well. All of that part of the investigation. Of course, Bend police working alongside the FBI to try to figure out how in the heck this happened. Back to you.
Great, Steve. Thank you so much. We appreciate the time. Right now, city officials in Jackson, Mississippi are cautiously optimistic as the water begins to recede in the Pearl River following record-setting rain. There were concerns the river, which is connected to a reservoir, might spill over into homes and businesses. While officials are hoping that won't happen now, a state of emergency is still in place as local leaders warn people, be careful on the roads. Guad Venegas is in Jackson, Mississippi for us. Guad, the river crested just below the major flood stage. Talk about what you're seeing and hearing from people there.
Ellison, when you say just below, we're talking inches. Officials were scared that they could rise to 35.5 feet, maybe 36 feet is where we saw the levels in 2020, and the water did go into some people's homes here. Now, what officials are seeing or reporting is that the levels are now going back to lower levels where they were before the weekend. We saw the flash floods last weekend with some of that flooding, and then, of course, over the weekend, more rain had caused or triggered the state of emergency. Now, you can see behind me one of the neighborhoods that did flood. We saw some vehicles affected, and this water, when the river crested, was only inches away from people's front door. That's the moment. That was last night when authorities were fearing the worst. They asked some of the residents in these neighborhoods near the Pearl River to evacuate. Other residents were using sandbags to protect their property. Fortunately, as you can see, the weather has improved. It hasn't rained today, and the river is going back to the lower levels. Some of the residents that live in this area are being warned to be careful because the level, as you can see, is still in the street. You can actually see one of the vehicles that's parked there still in the water, and it's slowly going to go back to the lower levels that we saw. Now, that reservoir that's just northeast of the city is a reservoir that has water that is used for the city is for recreational purposes, not necessarily to protect from flooding, but it has been holding some of the water that would have flooded the neighborhoods. We were told that the gates are now releasing less water than we saw over the weekend, but it's still about 40,000 cubic feet. That could fill up an Olympic-sized pool every 2 seconds, just so you can get an idea of the water that is still flowing down the Pearl River. It is still flooded, but fortunately in the areas that are right next to these communities, Allison.
Wow. So officials, as you said, they are still urging people not to return to their homes, at least until they've been given the all clear. Based on what you're seeing right now, from what you're hearing, speaking with officials, is there any sense of when that all clear might come?
So this warning is for the people that, of course, are in these neighborhoods where the water has flooded the streets. It's practically impossible for some of them to drive through this area. We've seen many vehicles come by, drive right up to the water and turn around. So they do have to wait until the water level drops a little more for them to be able to get into these properties, of course. Now, they are saying that what they're seeing is much better than anticipating. There is another problem happening at the moment in Jackson, and the mayor told us he wanted people to know that they are working on fixing that problem. It's a water problem, but it's something different. There's an issue with the water service in people's homes throughout Jackson because of the water pressure not being where it should be. Some people haven't had any water at all, and this problem wasn't initially related to the flooding, but the flooding did make it much more difficult. So they are focusing their efforts on restoring the water service for all of the residents, while for those that live in these flooded neighborhoods, they're just asking them to wait till the water clears for them to, of course, return to their properties. Allison.
All right, Guad Venegas, thanks for that. Now to Kentucky, where some students headed back to school today, even though they're still dealing with a lot of destruction left behind by deadly flooding. A few weeks ago, historic rainfall destroyed homes and buildings, forcing district officials to delay the first day of school. The damage is so severe in some counties, they still don't have a start date for classes. Despite all of that, some students and teachers say they are committed to showing up. Listen.
We're not as prepared as we normally are, but we are wanting to see everyone's face and get back to normalcy the best we can.
Clay Esemwa joins me now from Breathitt County, Kentucky. And Clay, we're hearing that it could take some communities years to recover from this flooding. What are you seeing and hearing on the ground?
Hey, Allison, good to hear from you. Years is right, and it makes sense, right? Because as viewers will remember, this area saw once in 1,000 year flooding, and we've seen it here today. While students came back to school, there were buses, and there was some high energy. There was also some cautious optimism because of the level of damage. We saw water damage. The floors were absolutely stripped, and some classrooms are fully out of commission due to the water damage. But outside of the physical issues and the physical toll, there's also the emotional toll. I spoke with the guidance counselor here at Breathitt County High School. She's worked here for 6 years, and here's what she tells me about her fears for her students.
My biggest concern is the anxiety and the PTSD and the stress that they're going to feel when they come back to school. There are homes that don't exist anymore. Students are living in tents, in their carports, or on their home's old foundation. They have lacked laundry service and personal hygiene items.
And Allison, that's not an exaggeration. By one estimate, out of the 800 students that attend this school, 55 are considered to be houseless or homeless. Many still do not have access to power or water. So in addition to delays in education, there's also concerns about their safety and well-being. Allison?
Let's talk quickly about the relief for this. I mean, Governor Andy Beshear has signed off on $212 million in relief money. At this point, Clay, do we know exactly how that money will be spent? Is it enough? Is it going to the areas, the places that have the greatest need?
Yeah, Allison. So we know Governor Andy Beshear signed that bill giving the $212.7 million in aid funding. $40 million of that is expected to go to the Department of Education. What are they going to do with that? Well, the hope is that it will go towards repairs. While this school and county were able to open schools today, for counties around the state, that was not the case. Many have delayed. You mentioned it at the top. Some do not know what date they will open. Others say they're waiting for Labor Day or the end of September. And that's a major delay for a large population of students, so that's a concern. And Governor Beshear's bill also extends access to online education, as well as gives more flexibility when it comes to attendance, because like I said, there are still infrastructure issues. Some students literally can't get to the classroom. So like the Department of Ed said, it's going to be a long road to recovery, and we're definitely going to be watching it here. Allison?
Clay Esemwa, thanks so much. We have some breaking news out of Iraq. At least 10 people are dead in Baghdad after a top Shiite clerk announced he is resigning. These are some of the scenes in the capital city as hundreds stormed the government palace. You're seeing security forces here fight with protesters loyal to the retiring clerk. Iraq's government has been deadlocked for almost a year now. Officials say at least 24 people are hurt from gunfire or tear gas. The U.S. says there's no plans at this time to evacuate the U.S. embassy there. And a team of nuclear experts with the International Atomic Energy Agency is in Kyiv today before a highly anticipated visit this week to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. Here they all are. Ukraine says they're going to focus on 3 major tasks: physical protection, nuclear safety, and guarantees of the, quote, non-proliferation of nuclear materials. That last one is important. There's been so much shelling around the plant, officials have started giving out iodine tablets to people in the surrounding area. If you don't know, iodine is used to try and prevent radiation poisoning. All of this comes as the Ukrainian military announces the launch of a counteroffensive in southern Ukraine in an area that is currently held by Russian forces. Today, a defense spokesperson claimed Ukrainian forces are already, in his words, exhausting the enemy. Josh Letterman joins me now. Josh, it's wonderful to see you. Let's start with the nuclear team arriving in Ukraine today. This is an issue you have been following so closely. It's coming after weeks of negotiation with Russia and Ukraine, but realistically, what can we expect to come out of this visit once they actually get to the plant?
Well, once they get to Zaporizhzhia, Ellison, which I'm told will be as early as Wednesday, they'll be able to inspect the damage that has already been inflicted on the nuclear plant so far in this war. They'll also be able to verify whether the backup systems, the backup power, and other safety mechanisms that you need for a nuclear power plant this size are still intact. And then hopefully they'll be able to get some type of a read on whether the Ukrainian nuclear workers who are still operating that plant are working under conditions that are conducive to allow this plant to function safely going forward. But there are certainly some significant limitations in what they're going to be able to see and do there. And I spoke with Mariana Budiaran, who is a nuclear expert at Harvard University, about what these nuclear experts can and can't do. Take a listen to what she said.
The mission will come and it will go, and it will have to leave those people behind. It's also unclear, for instance, how candidly will the staff, the Ukrainian staff, will be able to talk to the IAEA inspectors. The temporary nature of this mission is unfortunately going to be its limitations.
And Ellison, today the White House called for a controlled shutdown of the 2 remaining nuclear reactors that are still online at that nuclear plant. They also said that the U.S. wants to see a demilitarized zone around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. That is an idea that Russia has repeatedly rejected.
Josh, in recent weeks, we have seen the fighting in Zaporizhzhia intensify, but fighting in this area is not something that's only just begun. The fact that they're giving out iodine tablets to people who live in the vicinity of that plant now is alarming. I mean, it baffles the mind that there's something going on right now that makes them feel like they need to do this when we've seen back and forth at other nuclear plants where they didn't necessarily take this step. So give us a sense of what it is like on the ground for people who still live there. And from people reading this, hearing about this in America, how big of a deal is it that they're giving out these iodine tablets right now?
It's a big deal. You don't start giving people iodine tablets if you don't think there's a chance they may need to take them. And a lot of this was prompted, Ellison, by the incident we saw late last week where a fire near the plant forced it to be taken off of Ukraine's electricity grid for the first time in its history. Now, in addition to that iodine distribution, the state-run energy company is telling residents to get prepared to seal their windows and their ducts to prevent radiation from coming inside if there is a spread. And we've talked to residents of Zaporizhzhia who said, look, they're not going to leave their homes yet because, as you pointed out, this has been going on for weeks. They don't know how much longer it'll go on, but they have bags packed ready to go by their door to try to evacuate as soon as possible. And in fact, the local authorities here are revising their evacuation plans for how they would get anyone within about a 30-mile radius of this plant out of there as soon as possible, which of course entails getting Ukrainians who are currently living in Russian-occupied territory into Ukraine and out of harm's way.
Okay, so let's talk about this Ukrainian counteroffensive. About a month ago, Ukrainian military officials were warning people who lived in the Kherson region to go ahead and start evacuating because a counteroffensive was going to come to take back this Russian-controlled territory. They control the majority of the Kherson region, and they have really since the early days of this war. Today, this official confirmation that a counteroffensive is happening, it's already underway. What's your takeaway from this announcement? Is there any sense, from where you're standing at least, of what this war will look like in 2-3 weeks? I mean, was the counteroffensive already a little bit underway and they're just confirming it now? What's going on, and what do you take away from that announcement?
Well, what we had seen already taking place before today was some attacks in Crimea, some attacks in Russian territory on ammunition depots, on air bases, the kinds of things that Russia needs as its rear base, as its staging ground to launch attacks into Ukraine. That appears now to have been the precursor to Ukraine actually trying to go in and push the Russians back from territory that they currently hold. And it will do a lot to reassure Ukrainians who had been skeptical that this counteroffensive that Ukraine has been talking about, frankly, for weeks now, was ever going to materialize. Here it is. They are now starting, according to Ukrainian military officials, they were able today to breach some of Russia's front lines near Kherson, the first city to fall to Russia in the war. But the question is, are they going to have the military capacity for this to really be successful? We already saw Russia's military today claiming that as they tried to repel that Ukrainian counteroffensive, they were able to kill several hundred Ukrainian troops in the process. Now, that can't be independently confirmed right now, and Ukraine hasn't commented on it, but certainly all sides are anticipating that this battle is now shifting to the south as Ukraine tries inch by inch to take back territory that has been occupied by Russia now for months, Ellison.
And breaking news out of the White House. NBC News is first to learn that President Biden will give a primetime address this Thursday outside of Independence Hall in Philadelphia on the soul of the nation. According to a White House official, the president's speech will focus on how America's, quote, rights and freedoms are still under attack, which was a core message of his 2020 campaign. And it all comes just 2 months before the midterms in November. I want to get right to Monica Alba, who's on the north lawn of the White House. Monica, talk to us about the timing of this speech and the significance of the backdrop. Why Philadelphia? Why Independence Hall?
Yeah, this is brand new reporting from our resident Biden whisperer, Mike Memley Ellison, and we're learning about this speech. It is notable presidents taking the time to give a big address after that 8 p.m. hour. This is something clearly the White House wants to make a bit of a show of, and it's really a testing ground for a midterm message, but one that is hearkening back to candidate Joe Biden and really what he ran on in 2020. So he is going to be speaking in Philadelphia, coincidentally, where he had one of his rallies that kicked off his entire campaign those years ago. So they want to circle back to this idea, referencing the founding fathers and where the nation has come to this point, how democracy has progressed, and where the president and this White House feel there is still work to be done. So in the words of one White House official, the president is going to, quote, make clear who is fighting for critical rights, who's fighting for freedoms, and who's fighting for our democracy. And he plans to make a very sharp contrast to Republicans. And we saw a preview of that last week where he spoke at one of the first DNC rallies as we do hit this midterm sprint to the finish. And he talked about how some Republicans and that MAGA ideology amounts to, in the president's words, semi-fascism. So it's not clear whether he's going to be that aggressive or lean in as much on Thursday, but I think you can expect to hear that kind of language in terms of how he feels Democrats can position themselves versus Republicans in these broader themes, again, of protecting and improving our democracy, we understand, Ellison.
Monica, you said it might be some sort of testing ground for a midterm message. Is there something that we should be keeping an eye out for when we listen to him give this speech tomorrow that might reveal some sort of campaign strategy within this speech?
I do think so. And remember, this is a president who wanted to hit the road in the last month or so, but then he had a COVID diagnosis, then a rebound infection. There's been a lot else going on. So this is really his first opportunity to do that. But notable also that he's going to be in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, because it'll be his third time in the key state in the span of a week. He's going to be heading there tomorrow for an event. And then we know on Labor Day, on Monday, he's going to be attending a parade in Pittsburgh. So we know that Pennsylvania, of course, most critical to Joe Biden, the person. That is where he is from. He has a lot of pride surrounding that, but he also has always chosen it to be his backdrop for some of his most important campaign moments as he looks ahead to the midterms. And then, of course, the conversation will shift right after that to 2024, where he has said he does intend to run for re-election, and this will be part of that campaign messaging strategy. Allison.
All right, Monica Alba on that breaking news for us. Thank you so much. Prosecutors in an illegal abortion case in Nebraska filed a request to determine the admissibility of evidence in a pretrial hearing today. The case is against 18-year-old Celeste Burgess, who is facing 2 misdemeanor and a felony charge after allegedly terminating her pregnancy back in April at 29 weeks and trying to burn and dispose of the remains. Celeste's mother, Jessica, also faces misdemeanor and felony charges for allegedly helping her after an investigation found Facebook messages between the 2 women suggested that she had obtained the abortion pills for her daughter with instructions on how to take them. Abortion is now illegal in Nebraska after 20 weeks. Both women have pleaded not guilty. And coming up, masks are still a back-to-school essential in some classrooms around the United States. What's happening in one major city to make sure the year starts safely and off the trail? What's forcing Texas gubernatorial candidate Beto O'Rourke to cancel a slew of events? All of that after the break. Across the country, kids are back in class today, and we're learning that every school kind of has a different game plan for dealing with COVID. Take Philly. For students there, the year's beginning with a 10-day mask mandate for everyone in public school. And they're not alone. Over in Newark, New Jersey, they're planning something similar, with their public schools planning to continue masking when classes start next week. But for kids in D.C., health experts say they're looking at some of the strictest COVID protocols in the country. They have a vaccine mandate, and any student over the age of 12 must be vaccinated against COVID to go to school this year. But for some parents, they're saying their kids, well, they're just happy to be back.
My son right here is saying he loves school, so when they was going virtual, he really didn't like it. He liked being around other kids, so I like that they're going that.
George Solis joins me now. George, you're in Philly. We heard a little bit from that mother there, but tell us, when you're speaking with students, school officials, what's the sense, the feeling you get as it relates to this 10-day mask requirement? Do they like it? Are they frustrated? What's the deal?
Yeah, hey, Allison, with day one almost basically in the books, we did see some students with smiles on their faces. Admittedly, we could tell through those masked expressions. Many of them happy to just be back in the classroom after 2 years. I mean, for them, this has felt like a long haul, especially for parents. And of course, there is a mixed reaction. There's always some controversy with things that are pandemic related. Some parents happy to see a mask mandate, especially after the summer break. Others not pleased at all, saying, why are we still doing this when most school districts across the country have lifted or made masking optional at this point? School district officials of Philadelphia here saying, hey, this is what we want for our students and staff. We think this is what's going to work best. We have seen the research. We have listened to the guidance. Earlier today, the superintendent of schools, who is new here in Philadelphia, addressed some of those concerns and controversy. Take a listen.
The pandemic has had a lingering effect on us. It may continue to present some challenges. We want to really make sure to understand what our children are telling us. We're trying to make sure that this year that we attend to the learning loss that they experienced.
Yeah, so again, they're committed to this. And right now, with the CDC transmission being what it is, they are just continually to advocate for those 10 days. But there is some talk that it could be extended if that transmission does start to increase, which is something they'll keep a close eye on in the fall and winter months.
And George, health experts are urging state officials to step up their COVID preparedness, especially for the fall and winter. They're anticipating a COVID and a flu surge. How are schools thinking about this, especially since districts across the country are all treating it differently, and it seems like there's just such a patchwork of rules?
Yeah, it's certainly complicated. So the best course of advice is to, of course, have parents and guardians call their schools, call their school districts to get the best advice on what their school district might be doing when it comes to masking, testing, even isolation. Here in Philadelphia, they are relying on their medical officer, Dr. Kendra McDowell, who is an epidemiologist and pediatrician here in the city. And so they're listening to her guidance, saying what's going to work best for them, especially as they enter those fall and winter months. Right now, with the CDC transmission being medium in Philadelphia, they are already keeping a close eye on things, but there is concern, I should say, that if those cases move up to the high transmission, that mandate could return, stirring up more controversy.
And the FDA is planning to authorize updated versions of both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. Is there a sense that these booster shots are going to become requirements for students in more cities anytime soon?
Yeah, and that's a good question. Right now, there seems to be some almost infighting between the FDA advisory panel on what the FDA might do next right now. And they are supposed to convene in the next couple of days to hear what the FDA has to say about these boosters for the Omicron subvariant boosters that are expected to be ready to go by Labor Day. But it's ultimately, as we know, the CDC that will make the final recommendations for those age groups. Allison?
George Solis, thank you so much for that. NBC covers hundreds of stories each day, and because you could not possibly read, watch, or listen to all of them, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their region in a segment we like to call The Local. From our West Coast bureau, crews in Vacaville, California spent hours this morning cleaning tomato sauce off of I-80. A big rig collided with the car, spilling tomatoes everywhere. The mess also caused a 4-car pileup in the other direction. 3 people were taken to the hospital. From our Southern Bureau, Texas Democratic candidate for Governor Beto O'Rourke is recovering after being hospitalized with a bacterial infection. He's now resting at home in El Paso, but all campaign events are on hold. The former congressman says he'll be back on the road as soon as possible. From our New York Bureau, minor league baseball players might soon become unionized. The Major League Baseball Players Association has sent out authorization cards that would allow for an election. Enough yes votes would lead to them being part of the MLBPA, as well as a round of collective bargaining. This could establish higher wages and improve working conditions across minor league baseball. And still ahead, we'll head to the U.S. Open, where tennis royalty hopes for one last crown. Serena Williams begins the final tournament of her illustrious career tonight. What fans are saying ahead of the opening match. That's next. Not long now until we see tennis great Serena Williams out on the court at the U.S. Open in what could be her last singles match before retiring. All eyes will be on the 23-time Grand Slam winner as she competes in the first round tonight. She's up against Danka Konovic, a 27-year-old from Montenegro. Kovinic is currently ranked number 80, and Williams is going to show up to the match in style. Nike says Williams will wear a figure skating-inspired dress with a 6-layer skirt, one for each of her previous wins at the Flushing's Meadow U.S. Open. And on her feet, diamond-encrusted sneakers. A fan getting ready to watch the match tells our Emily Akeda they're excited to watch Williams play before she hangs up her racket.
We might be witnessing history because this might be our last time seeing Serena play a real match. So, you know, we just have to embrace it.
Rahima Ellis is outside Arthur Ashe Stadium in Queens, New York. Rahima, you probably could tell by my mispronunciation of some names. I don't know a whole lot about tennis, but I know Serena Williams. I know the Williams sisters. Serena Williams has so many fans. What are you hearing from them? What's the atmosphere like tonight?
Well, the crowd is building because, Ellison, we're about an hour away from the big event of the day, and that is when, as you point out, royalty, tennis royalty, will take center court here again at Arthur Ashe Stadium. And people are excited. They've been coming in here all day. We met people from Maine, from North Carolina, from Maryland, from all over. They've come, and lucky enough to get a ticket for this big event. 24,000 people in the largest tennis stadium in the world are going to be in here tonight, and it's expected that it will be a roaring crowd in favor of Serena Williams, what they think might well be the last singles match that she might have in this tournament in terms of her playing at the caliber that she's been known to play, the champion that she is. So, yeah, there's a lot of buzz here. The crowd is building. It's hot as can be out here, but that is not deterring anyone. People have come early, and they plan to stay late.
What are you expecting to see in what could be her last match here, last tournament. I mean, in terms of the outfit, obviously her tennis skills far more important than what she's wearing, but it seems like she's making a statement, if you will, with this outfit. What do you read into that?
Yeah. Well, I read into it that it's definitely Serena. You remember one time she wore a tutu, and she got talked about for that. One time she also wore a catsuit, and people had much to say about that. But as one fan said to me, it's not about what she wears. It's about what she does when she's on the court and how she swings that racket. And that's what people will be looking for. Besides the fact, Serena is an entertainer. She's a performer. She is a tennis star, and so she's going to come out looking like a star. And no matter what happens here tonight, there's going to be an amazing tribute to her. We talked to someone who knows a whole lot about that. Listen to what she said.
Win or lose, we are going to pay tribute to the greatest of all time on Arthur Ashe Stadium.
Tonight.
It really will be a moment for Serena's fans to thank her and to show her how much they love her.
As Serena is going to come, before she comes out of that hallway into center court, there's going to be a video tribute to her, the Queen of Queens here in Queens, New York. And fittingly, it's going to be narrated by Queen Latifah. Allison?
Rahima, in terms of technical play on the court, what are you watching for in this matchup? Danka Kovinic, how big of a threat is she?
Well, you know, it's a 50-50 game when you step out onto that court. Serena was only 17 when she walked out here in 1999, and she beat some of the greatest names in tennis when she started out 20 years ago. And so what we can expect is a game. As hard as she can play, I think Danica is also going to do her best. She said that she's excited and looking forward to it. We know that Serena is definitely looking forward to it. Allison?
All right, you said it. The tennis queen in Queens with Queen Latifah narrating. It sounds like a fantastic night, and I will be watching. Thank you so much for that. We appreciate you. And that's a wrap for this hour. We'll have more for you here tomorrow, same time, same place. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.